ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
She was every student's favourite teacher.
She would joke around with us, more like a friend than a teacher.
And I remember her saying to me that this is not goodbye, this is see you later kind of thing.
Well, if Ali is able to open up to somebody, that's a good thing.
But what began as attention became something else.
She was brainwashing us from the start.
The Favourite, a 5-part investigation into the cost of silence. Available now. Search Background Briefing on the ABC Listen app or wherever you get your podcasts.
One of the great things about owning an EV right now is that you're not taxed for using the roads. Those behind the wheel of other cars pay the fuel excise when they refill. But the government is looking to change that. Today, Giles Parkinson, founder and editor of Renew Economy and the Driven websites, and an EV owner himself, on what he says is a half-assed idea. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. Giles, a lot of us really dream of getting an EV, but they're still pretty expensive, aren't they? Although the cost is coming down.
Yeah, the cost is coming down. In the sort of the middle range of the market, they're probably competitive with petrol cars, particularly if you take the whole cost of ownership. But I think for many people sort of counting their dollars at that lower range, there's more choice now, but they're probably still leaning towards their petrol or their hybrid cars. If they're thinking just about the upfront cost of it, if you're thinking about the sort of, the cost over, say, 5 or 6 years, if you think about insurance and petrol and maintenance, then, there's arguments to say that EVs are cheaper in many instances, but not the upfront costs yet.
Yeah, okay, so you mentioned petrol there. So one equation you might consider before buying an EV is that you don't have to pay a tax that the federal government whacks on petrol, which is currently 50 cents a litre and makes it a lot of money.
Yeah, that's right. This is called the fuel excise scheme, and that's been a major revenue raiser for the government for several decades now. It originally started out as a scheme to raise money for fixing roads, but that link has actually been cut for, quite a while now. I think it's sort of between 15 or even 20 years. And so basically it's just really part of general revenue.
Yeah, they earn about $17 billion a year from that, so it's really significant. But if you're driving around in an EV, you don't have to pay that. But that could change soon.
So the government has been looking at this and thinking, crikey, what are we going to do if, say if tomorrow every car on the road was electric and we don't have the fuel tax? We've just lost $17 billion. So they're going, what do we do now? So they've been thinking about like a road user charge. What's really interesting, though, is that the biggest drop in revenue from the fuel tax scheme in the last few years has actually been from hybrid cars, because hybrids mean it's more fuel efficient, particularly at the top end. So the really expensive hybrid cars from the sort of luxury makers like Mercedes and Audi and BMW and things like that, they're the ones paying virtually not very much anyway, or a lot less than they were before for road user on that sort of general sort of taxation and revenue. So the biggest drawdown has come down from the move to hybrids. And people are trying to work out, well, what do we do with EVs then? Because they're paying nothing ostensibly, but they're just trying to work out, well, what's a fair thing to go forward? And that's where the road user charge comes up.
Yeah, okay, so let's just consider that a bit more. After August's Economic Reform Roundtable, the Treasurer Jim Chalmers indicated there was a lot of support from experts and interest groups for this so-called road user charge.
There was a surprising degree of consensus around the need for road user charging when it comes to EVs, but there's not yet a perfect consensus on the best model or on the best timing of that. And so I committed to work with the states and territories on that.
And he's really made it clear that it would only apply to EVs, so it's not designed to be a double tax for people who drive petrol cars. And you're sort of indicating hybrids as well.
Yeah, that's as you said, interest groups have
Yes.
supported that, and I suspect that might be some of the incumbent industry. Look,
Yes.
the electric vehicle industry is well aware of the situation, and they're arguing that they're okay with a road user charge. They just don't want to be unfairly penalised. And I think there's a lot of disappointment in the idea that they're coming out now and saying, oh, well, we'll only put this tax on EVs, because if they do that, then they're not addressing the revenue loss from hybrids, for instance. And I think the argument is that let's just change the whole system and put every car on a comparable road user charge, which links then directly with the weight of the vehicle and the distance travelled. And there's ways and means in doing that. And so it really doesn't matter what thing you're using, every car that uses the road then pays their fair share of this thing. If that's what you're worried about, I mean, if you're worried about revenue loss, then you should be addressing the hybrid issue, and they're not addressing that at all. If you're worried about emissions and health, and not just sort of carbon emissions, you're talking about sort of particulates, which place a very heavy toll, then you need a different solution. But if you're just talking about revenue as an overall revenue, then a universal road user charge would be the fairer one. I think there's a lot of disappointment that even after that 3-day summit, that was the best they could come up with.
Right.
It's just very frustrating.
All right. Well, Giles, this isn't, though, an entirely new idea, is it? Because Victoria and New South Wales have already moved to introduce their own EV taxes. Just tell me about that.
Yeah, look, Victoria introduced theirs in, I think it was 2022 now. It didn't last very long because there was a High Court challenge which ruled it unconstitutional. They ruled that they had no right to gather excise. That was a federal thing only.
A landmark decision by the High Court found the tax was unlawful, meaning for the past 2 years, the government's been collecting 2 cents for every kilometre travelled by low-emission cars without the authority to do so.
So the New South Wales one, we're not really too sure where that is at the moment. But really, those things were really just about revenue grabs from the states. They just saw the federal government getting $17 billion worth from the fuel excise. They saw these new EV things coming in and thought, oh, here's an opportunity for a revenue grab. And they pretty much admitted that behind the scenes. It was really just part of their ongoing negotiations. And there's a brawl every year or every second year about, who gets what share of GST and things like that. And they all want more revenue from the tax. And that was really about doing that, because if you think about it, I mean, just having 6 states with different schemes, and people drive interstate. They might go around Australia. I mean, how do you work out a tax like that? And the Victorian thing, it was knocked on the head by the High Court, but it was also so clunky, and it just drove everyone crazy. It was just a complete mess.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because how does it actually work? How much do EV drivers have to pay, and how does the government actually check up on that? I mean, it's somewhat complicated, I would think.
Yeah, so the system in Victoria was basically odometer readings, and you had to sort of get people to fill out a form or send in a photo of their odometer and do things like that. What's interesting is that in New Zealand, they've actually come up with their own. So they had a road user charge for electric vehicles, which they've had in place for about a year or so. They've now made the decision that that's not very fair. So they're going to go to this universal charge. So everyone's going to pay a charge based on their weight and the distance travel. And what they're thinking of doing or looking to do is having some sort of electronic system. Now, these are the sort of things that always were already used in heavy trucks, for instance, just for monitoring their travelling and their distance and their timing and things like that. So the idea is that they'd use something similar for cars and do it that way, because really otherwise it just becomes a nightmare just in administration. You probably lose as much on administration costs as you would actually be pulling in if you think about sort of everyone taking a photo of their odometer and sending it in. And that'd be ridiculous.
Yeah, all right. But if you did that and you charged every road user, you'd get rid of the excise, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's what they're doing in New Zealand. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, all right.
No, you wouldn't double tax them.
Sure.
And then you can frame it in many different ways if you wanted to be really sophisticated about it. If you wanted to take in, okay, well, should people pay for the repair of the roads that they're using? Should people pay for the damage to the environment that they're causing? Should people recompense, for the weight of the car or the distance travelled? There's all different ways of cutting this.
EVs are a lot heavier, aren't they? Because those really big batteries in them do make them a lot heavier than a normal petrol car. Or aren't they?
I mean, I don't think they actually are. I mean, look, comparison. If you're going to compare a Corolla with a similar size EV, then the EV is probably heavier. But if you think about the cars that people are buying now, particularly petrol and diesel cars, those really big SUVs, they're all heavier than most EVs. You could argue that those really heavy vehicles, those utes, particularly when they're fully laden, are are getting away with not paying their fair share as well. Everyone seems to be sort of picking on and demonising EVs for whatever reason. I think a lot of it's political, a lot of it's special interest groups. But, there's a lot of exceptions and there's a lot of different ways you can look at it.
Do you think there's a bit of a culture war going on here then?
Oh, goodness, yes, absolutely, yes. I mean, look, most of the legacy car makers, some of them are making really nice electric vehicles, but, geez, they're being dragged kicking and screaming into this transition and, they're highly profitable companies. They're making a lot of money selling petrol cars and diesel cars. They make good ones, but they need repairs. They make a lot of money out of repairs and the warranties and everything like that. So, they'd rather not if they didn't have to.
All right. Okay. Well, Giles, let's look now then at what this likely road user charge will do to the EV market. Do you think that this sort of charge might really turn people off?
Well, it could do, particularly if it's unfair and it's only applied to EVs, because basically people, as we mentioned at the start of this, EVs are probably more expensive than petrol and diesel cars, the equivalents. And so if you're going to buy one and you're thinking about in terms of, or money and how much it costs you, you might be attracted to an EV because of the total cost of ownership. So it costs you more up front, but you spend less on electricity and insurance and maintenance and all those sort of things. And therefore, it works out even or even better for the EV over time. But if you've got this extra charge, and if you take the Victorian example, for instance, you're looking at about $450, $500 a year if you drive about 15,000 kilometres. If you drive twice that much, then it's twice that much again. So that could actually make the difference if people are just really careful about their budgets. And we're now getting into that market. You could argue that, the early adopter market, the people who would buy EVs anyway, no matter what they cost and how much they might save, they've kind of done that and they'll do it and they'll continue to do it anyway. But now we're trying to move into this, what's called like the early mass market. And they're the people who do count their dollars, don't have huge amounts of money they can just sort of throw around just because they feel, let's go electric. They might like to go electric, but they're wondering whether they can afford it. And this could actually tip the balance in a lot of instances.
And as you say, we do tend to prefer the hybrids at the moment. You think this could really slow the take-up of EVs. So what does that mean for our apparent transition to electric vehicles, which, we're on the path to that. We're meant to be.
That's right. Yeah, well, look, we're going a bit slower than we thought at the moment. And I guess a lot of that's because, as you said, people do prefer hybrids at the moment. Now, I'm not too sure whether they're preferring hybrids for a good reason or because they've been sold a story about range anxiety and unreliability and fire risk and things like that. I think that has had something to do with it. But look, it's consumer choice, and I guess basically with that information's got to go out to show that EVs are safe and they can actually get from A to B, and charging them isn't, or it shouldn't be, as hard as people think it might be.
All right. Well, Giles, I know you're an EV owner, but what do you think on balance? Do you think it's a good idea just to have one charge for all vehicles on the road, get rid of the fuel excise? Doesn't that just make things a little fairer?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think everyone is in support of that. And look, you can sort of tweak it around to make exemptions and to fiddle around, but basically everyone should be on the same deal. But, right now, just coming up with an EV-only tax just seems to be, well, it seems to be half-witted and half-arsed, really. And if it's a stepping stone towards a universal road user tax, then that's okay. But there's no sign that it is at the moment, and that's the concern, I think, for most people.
Giles Parkinson is founder and editor of Renew Economy and The Driven. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed and Jessica Wukyanov. Audio production by Cinnamon Nippard. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. Thanks for listening.